Good morning, afternoon, and thank you for joining the SafePaaS monthly webinar series today. I'm Emma, and I'm the marketing manager here at SafePaaS, and I'm joined by Adil Khan, our CEO. Today's session is how to protect your business critical applications against cyber threats. Any questions you have, feel free to put them in your control panel, and we'll be sure to address them at the end of the session today. So without further ado, let's get started. Adil?
Thank you, Emma, and thanks everyone for joining today's webinar in our series of 2020 topics. Today's topic, as Emma just said, is around cybersecurity, and a number of customers in the recent weeks and months have reached out to us about just understanding how SafePass can help them improve their identity governance process. And it's a mature topic, but there's some new challenges and new threats that are impacting our customers and their business applications. So we wanted to take an opportunity to share what we're sharing with the market and customers in our conversations, and also some new information for 2020 to step back and take another look at it. Today's agenda is briefly introducing the company for those of you that may not be familiar with us, and then kind of jumping right into the topic of cybersecurity and why is business so concerned about cybersecurity. We'll change, as always, share some stats and numbers and give you an idea of what's trending in the market around this topic. We'll get into the understanding of the identity governance area to get on the same page on how we see it, how the analysts are describing this market, and how our customers are adopting latest and greatest technology to help them mitigate risk. One of those technologies that SafePass brings to the table, we'll talk about in a case study later on, but we'll also describe that on how SafePass can help you lay out a roadmap to get a more beefed up security model for your enterprise. Just a bit about ourselves. There's a number of events that we do beside these webinars. So if you're looking to meet our teams in person, we do go across US, Europe, the UK, and so forth. So feel free to reach out to us. We just finished an event that Bob Enders did in Rocky Mountain User Group, and it covered some of the security topics as well around user provisioning. And then we have a conference coming up here in OEUG Collaborate 2020. We're really excited to have sponsorship at that conference, and we look forward to seeing you. If you're part of our user group, we'll hold a user group meeting there as well. 250 some customers today, so we're really blessed by having a great community of users that provide us some great feedback almost on a daily basis across our networks, and that feedback turns into solutions that we bring to you through these workshops and opportunities to share our best practices with you. So let's jump in to the topic. Let's take a look at some numbers. I always like to start by level setting on where we are today as a market. So this is some research that I picked up from Washington Post, a institute called Ponem, I can't pronounce it very well, and dark reading. This was also mentioned in an E&Y article that I recently read. So main point here is that there's about 6.4 billion with a B, number of fake emails that are sent out worldwide. And these emails are typically used to create fake accounts. And the best way for a cyber criminal to get into your organization is through those fake accounts. So they'll come in and they'll send an email that sounds like it's coming from your CFO or someone higher up, and you as an employee, you click on it, and that creates the ability for them to install malware or do other nefarious things to your enterprise business systems. So that's alarming for me. I think it is for most people. Combine that with on the top right, that a recent study has shown that just in government, officials, which you would think that all the mandates the government has in the US that you would have secure passwords, about 1,464 people in this one organization were using password 123 as their password. Okay, that's a study that was conducted by Washington Post. On the bottom left, you see 17%, and that's the number of organizations that say that number one fear they have when it comes to cybersecurity is for their customers' data to get lost. I mean, that's a significant percentage of revenue impact, not to mention reputational risk. That keeping up CFOs and CEOs up at night, right? So how can we help mitigate that risk? We'll talk a little bit about that today. And then on the finally on the bottom right coordinate, you see 3.6 million, and that's the average cost of data breach. So again, there's a lot of risk, and the cost is high. So as risk folks, we like to think of this as a high likelihood and high impact risk, which means that there's a cause for action here, and it's something we cannot tolerate. This is further kind of emphasized by a study, independent study that's done by Marsh, sponsored by Microsoft recently, last year, I believe, yes. And so this global cyber security survey that was conducted shows that cyber threat has really bubbled up to the top. And, you know, I've spent 15 plus years in risk management, and prior to that in financial controls, and I have never seen this in my career as the top risk for the executives. But of the survey of 1,512 executives that was conducted back in 2019, pretty recently, this has become the highest risk area for our customers and executives, well-run companies, as compared to, for example, brand and reputational risk, which has, historically been one of the top risks for companies. So it's even surpassed regulatory legislation like Sarbanes-Oxley, GDPR, other areas. So it's a much broader theme as we enter 2020 and look for new ways of protecting our businesses and growing our businesses, that this is a top risk for our executives. You may have heard of CrowdStrike. That's a company that helps respond to risk. So I also wanted to see what they're saying about response to risk. So once a threat occurs and it's basically, malware has somehow unfortunately gotten into your environment, you hire a company like CrowdStrike to help deal with this, whether it's a denial of service kind of a attack or some other attack. And so what we're finding that when that attack occurs, and market leaders like CrowdStrike are invited to come in and help remediate that risk in as quickly as possible, of course, they're reporting that about 36% at the bottom right there, it impacts the business, right? It disrupts the business. And if the business is disrupted, we've all seen what happened in China last few weeks, that as a real virus has taken over, that the economy has literally shut down, and we're seeing the markets react to that across the globe. So business disruption is something that impacts people's lives and businesses and economies and governments. And so that's 36%, right? On top of that, there's a 10% monetary loss, and you can read the rest of it, data theft and other items as well. So in other words, impact is high. And then you've seen from Microsoft in the other study that the likelihood is fairly high, or at least the executives believe the likelihood is pretty high. So what are we doing to assess risk? Again, this was very interesting for me to see. Hopefully it'll hit home with you as well. Is what Marsh says in this Microsoft-sponsored study is that when folks adopt new technology, which you can imagine today's world, we're always looking to get the better cloud application in our environment, digitize our business platform, become a more digital, agile organization. In our journey to become more digital as an enterprise and helping our enterprise become more digital, what's happening is that we're throwing a lot of new technology, right? There's a big trend towards cloud. We've done a number of studies on cloud. What are the risks of moving to the cloud? And just automating as much as possible through workflows and other things, letting your third-party vendors come in and other third parties come in and really engage with your organization and the data. So that's kind of what we're building, right? Which creates productivity, which creates bottom line benefits. So it's the trend where the market is headed. But what we're finding is that 74% of the folks in the study, when it comes to a technology adoption lifecycle, attempt to do somehow attempt to do some kind of a risk evaluation of that technology. And that breaks it down into those two pillars. 67% said that during the exploration of the technology, they'll also ask risk questions. And being a supplier of enterprise software ourselves, I see that in our business that customers ask us to fill out various risk surveys, make sure that their CISO's organization is comfortable with, for example, the SOC 1 that we provide and so forth. So that's kind of the due diligence that I see as well happening in our own market, and I would agree with that number. And then another 24% said they kind of wait till they get the PO out, right? Which is a little bit reactive, but that's real world. Some companies are just not as proactive as the others. But a good news there is 67% are including risk discussions and cyber threat discussions in their adoption of new technology. Now, 54% of that said that they just go ahead and adopt the technology, such as cloud or whatever, and then they think about what do we evaluate for risk. And of those 54%, it breaks it down, and you guys can read the numbers here, but the main point I'm trying to get across is that people are still reactive when they look at new technology, whether it's cloud like we're seeing a lot in the market, or some other digital IoT or whatever the latest gadget is that you're going after to improve your business. So during onboarding, 37% will look at the technology. What I find in my world, which is mostly around business critical applications, is that the worst place to do this is during user acceptance testing. You're about to launch a new Cloud ERP application or some other, let's say on-premise digitization that you're doing. In any case, when it comes down to user acceptance testing part of your project, that's when you bring in the auditors. And that's usually the worst time because as 25% of these folks are saying is that that's basically an exposure to, you basically put yourself up to fail because either the auditor will fail you or you will go live with a product and a solution that has high risk, and then you're more exposed to the outsiders. So you can see the percentages or the rest of the items that are listed, but I thought this was useful to kind of emphasize why the problem exists. You have likelihood that's high of getting attacked in 2020, and the impact is high. And on combination of that, the way you are assessing the risk is not giving you the full coverage, right? So there is the exposure that we look for in the risk world to be able to provide controls that mitigate that risk. So what does that mean? Let's bring it down to our world of enterprise application, which is in our topic today. So when you think about business critical applications like Oracle ERP Cloud, eBusiness Suite, SAP, JD Edwards, all of those different platforms that we support, what we find is that the privileged user access enables the big threats, right? So what Chief Information Officer is saying in this recent survey that was done, that they're not just intellectual properties, but they're impacting bottom line. For example, one of the main sources of fraud is now online. It's not about going and just an insider making up a number and then using that to pay themselves through a bank account. I mean, that's a risk we have mitigated for our customers for past 15 years. So we, for example, have controls that alert executives if there's a change to a supplier's bank account. But now you have this cyber threat where somebody could from outside get in, take over a rogue account that may be disabled, which has high privileges because they have access to ERP, which is where your bank accounting is set up, come in and process a payment, even though you have put in the best segregation of duty policies in place. So Ponman basically says that in that last bullet point on the left is that 45% of the respondents in this survey that this threat will continue to grow, right? So it's a unfettered threat, and it's impacting in terms of dollars, in terms of percentage of 88% of the IT professionals believe that it can cause an event in their own organization. These are experts that maintain business critical applications, so they're saying that this risk is something that is real. and we must act on it, obviously, if it's real. And then 3/4 of lost revenue up to $1 million in market value. And if you've seen some of the news out there, financial media, that is absolutely validated by the market. So again, when it comes down to the risk impact on the business financial applications, which is where you have your privileged users, either users that can do more than just access SharePoint and Word or whatever your Microsoft suite is, they can actually get into your your till, if you will, right? They can get in and look at they have keys to the kingdom, they have their hands in your till. And if somebody comes in and hijacks that account, whether it's a system service account, like many of us have, for interfaces to run or maintenance to be done, or an actual physical user that has maybe left the organization and so forth. So it can really harm your organization. And that's kind of validated with the same source again, by how that breaks down by areas. And you'll see that database administrators and system administrators are one of the top sources. So if I could get access to a DBA account through Active Directory, I could cause a lot of damage, change accounts, get myself set up as a supplier, and process a payment. The next big payment that's going to, let's say, your software vendor like SAP or Oracle, instead of hitting their bank account, it's going to hit my bank account in some nefarious country where it's hard to recover the funds. Right, so that's the business critical applications perspective, right? Which is cybersecurity is not just about your network; it's about what happens when folks get into it. These criminals get into your network. What kind of damage are they causing? And if you read these studies that I mentioned in more detail, you'll find that the damage is coming from these business critical applications. So what's the challenge? Why are we struggling with this? So the challenge our customers reporting this is basically identity governance is somehow in place. There's a band-aid solution or some manual solution. I'll explain what we see. So what we see is the explosion of technology across the enterprise, right? So you have many different technologies today. It's not just a single monolithic platform, one ERP, one mainframe. It's about having all of those things. You have some cloud apps, you have some on-premise apps, you have some databases and warehouses and BI tools, and all of these things get provisioned through many different sources. So sometimes you'll have a ServiceNow portal, others, as an executive, they just send emails. There's a help desk, somebody calls up because they're in a territory where they need access, they're in the field. So they just call the help desk to get access. They're a contractor joining the company, so they're being onboarded. There's a provisioning system. You've gotten an IDM solution from, let's say, Azure or Okta or SailPoint or something like that. So you have a provisioning tool, and you still have some paper forms, and and some people just walk by the IT's desk to get access directly in the system. And that's the real world that we deal with every day with our customers. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but that's just where we have arrived as the technology has grown over the years. And so you have these different users coming through different channels and requesting access. So it really is a mishmash of requests that is hard to control and audit, and that creates a IT governance problem for our CISOs. So this will just kind of highlight the process. Hundreds of users are coming in through different sources. As our technology is growing, many sources, it's become more inconsistent and ad hoc. So while we're doing our best to put a governance process in place and make sure we identify all our users, in this chaos, you can have someone slip in as a cyber criminal through and sit there in your organization, don't even act anything. That's one of the things I've read in the CrowdStrike study is this kind of a festing time where they'll come in and just monitor what's happening before they take an action. So they're watching in your environment, how people are getting paid, how are they processing supplier checks, how is the provisioning process done, and can we simulate that? For example, a CFO asking to access a bank account information, can we simulate that? And that's how they would come in and hide their steps, their human touch points, so forth. So challenges are that there's no consistent enforcement, and that's where the cyber threat is elevated, right? Because in this chaos, in this smoke, you will see things slip by. It's not a fortified system for governance of information technology, right? So therefore it's hard to audit. And I was just talking I think this week with a large consumer products company that has, I guess, thousands of outlets around the world. They basically have this problem, and the challenges that for their auditors, it just hit home with me when I talked to their auditors, that they basically have to audit all of this mess after it's happened, just because they can't go and impact the enterprise and make changes and go to a single iAccess type tool that we'll show you at the end of this presentation. It's going to be a transition for them. They basically have to audit after this happens, and every time they audit, they find policy violations, and then they have to go through a remediation cycle. So it creates, not having a predictive, proactive system in action. I've seen the amount of effort they're putting in to get through the process, and makes it very difficult for external auditors to rely on the risk assessment internally performed. And so as a result, this becomes a big remedial exercise. Instead of a proactive preventive control, it has now a remediation action to protect your information. And what we hear from the market, user access is one of the most common things that is tested in the top IT audits. Gartner says that this is deficiencies are more IT related. That's where IT auditors are spending most of their time. Again, I just mentioned that I had a recent engagement with a client where we felt the exact same thing. And then auditors like E&Y are saying that they're related to access controls. So why it's hard to protect this is because whenever we audit something in a reactive mode, we find problems like orphan accounts, people that just didn't get deprovisioned because there's so many different systems, and somehow we missed an ERP versus business critical application. So that's how you can get in a system and cause problems. Rogue accounts, I mentioned those. Coming in, criminals could come in and use system service accounts and so forth, and steal your data, abuse your systems, and perform transactions that can impact results. Privileged users, these are just users you have in the organization that I talked about a couple of slides ago, where they have keys to the kingdom, right? These are your DBAs, your sysadmins, your application administrators, and other super users in the organization. They have quite a bit of access because they're supporting your system, and you need somebody to have that access. Just that, how do you control and monitor that access is what we're going to talk about. And then just the entitlement creep, which is, people having one set of requirements, but temporarily they need something additional to process a specific project they're working on, but that is never taken away, or they switch departments and the previous access still kind of follows them, even though they've moved from finance to procurement, and though they don't need the bank account information anymore in procurement. So this is how entitlement creep happens, and that's just the real world and big business critical applications that are supporting thousands of users across the enterprise more and more, right? So how do we help you with identity governance? And so let's just kind of talk about what are the experts defining this space, and some of the characteristics of what you should look for when you think about identity governance, right? So basically, IGA, or Identity Governance Administration, as Gartner defines, is the managing of your digital identity and entitlements, right? So what roles and responsibilities are assigned to users, what privileges are assigned to user, whether it's in SharePoint or SAP or Oracle, what are the privileges that what are they entitled to across applications? These tools basically help make sure that the right people have the right access. So if I am working in the finance department, I need access to put journal entries in. If I'm working in purchasing department, I need to be able to set up a new supplier. So those are entitlements and resources that our employees need to do their job. Our staff needs that capability. And so what they do, what the IGA tools do, is they aggregate and correlate these different identities, entitlements, and create a enhanced control environment. So we don't want unfettered access to our contracts, our procurement, our financials and banking, because that creates risks of someone being able to get into our networks and perform tasks that are impacting our results and fraud. So let's take a look, a little bit, dig deeper on what that breaks down in terms of actual functional areas of a business. So the first thing is, how do you manage your identity lifecycle? So a new employee, how do you onboard them? A contractor, how do you onboard them? And it's typically people and things like software. So software interfaces, service accounts, people, your finance department, your controller. And notice that there's relationship to their organization. So people in a more complex organization, a global organization, let's say maybe in different business units, one sitting in UK, other sitting here in US. And so, can they see each other's data, right? That would be the example of how that works. So basically, eventually, what you're trying to do is maintain that control over that organization's structure, access to data, authorization to data, and it's all about not just business to employee, which is how we initially think about it, but it's also about business to consumer and business to business. So you may have third parties, partners in your business, that whether they're suppliers or service providers that have access to perform their jobs, or just consumers, your customers that need to be able to perform an e-commerce transaction, place an order, and things of that nature. If you're a bank, it's your customer that is opening a bank account. Okay, and then entitlement management. So now that we've talked about entities, the second thing we'll unpack as we unpack this identity governance. I mean, the second thing is an engagement entitlement management. So, at SafePaaS we call that roles management, but basically what that is the ability for you to go in and maintain, who has what level of access. So if I'm in finance, I can perform journal entries. If I'm procurement, I can create suppliers, that type of entitlement. That's what that is. So pretty obvious, but just to break it down a little bit further, it's typically a catalog of entitlements. So as I mentioned, we maintain that in our roles manager catalog. But these entitlements can consist of roles, groups, etc., memberships. And this is how we restrict user access to our data through entitlement management. And then auditability through access request workflow. So anytime a new access a new access request or a change access request comes in, being able to provide a business-friendly user interface where the users can come in, request access, in our case, that's self-service for our customers, and then enabling that approval process, notification, escalation throughout that provisioning process. And that's a key part of the identity governance that SafePaaS provides. Policy and roles, so putting policies around this whole process, so around entitlements and identities and workflows, making sure that, like in case, again, from a granular perspective, we'll talk about it, that you want to make sure that people, just because they're getting access to purchasing, they don't get access to a bank account update feature that's way at the bottom layer of that privilege or entitlement. So that's basically applying policies and roles to ensure that segregation of duties don't occur as part of people requesting that access, and that's a common way to manage the policies. Then as a line of defense, being able to certify that on a periodic basis, attestation process. So once you have these users with access and their organization is growing and changing and so forth, you want to be able to make sure that there are managers that are accountable for attestation of that process, and then also the fulfillment of that provisioning outcome. So if somebody has approved it through a workflow, how does that actually get approved? Is it automated? Like, for example, in a business critical application, or you do basically log a ticket or generate a ticket into ServiceNow or some other portal you have for ticketing, where that request gets then processed from the ticketing system manually by a user. So that's basically the fulfillment and certification process. And eventually, to wrap it all up, you want to be able to audit. It's got to be auditable, and you got to have analytics to be able to investigate when the risk does occur. So being able to provide dashboards and contextualize the access request, for example, around policy violation. In our case, we do the granular level, which we'll talk about how we'll differentiate SafePaaS from other IDM players in the market. So now that we're on the same page on what, for example, the research institutes are defining identity governance, and as I mentioned, that there are some risks, likelihood, impact, and results that we have seen in the market. Let's take a look at what does fine grain mean and how can SafePaaS provide that. So at SafePaaS, the fine grain IDM actually is central to our business mission, and you can see that in this example that SafePaaS itself is a platform as a service, so it sits in the cloud, and by being a platform, it has the ability to be configured for many different data sources that may sit on the cloud or on premise through various connections that our clients establish, push, pull, whatever the methodology that makes sense to them. So we have many different ways to connect to all 90% of the world's information system, business critical application systems out of the box. Chances are if using something like Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, we already have a connection because a lot of our customers use that. If it's something really homegrown, we can probably connect to that with a little bit of understanding of what's the APIs can be attached and so forth within a couple of weeks of worth of effort. So it's a global, flexible system with built-in risk management for access governance. And the tool we provide our clients to do this is called Data Probe, which enables them to quickly connect to us and then be able to securely transfer information we need to perform the user fine-grained identity governance. Also, we support many different devices, so you can come in through a mobile device or a traditional computer laptop. So just break that down a little bit. Financial identity governance is part of our overall information governance platform. It has more components that than just access governance, and the reason for that is we think of enterprise today as buying a holistic information governance solution as opposed to buying a number of fragmented cases, because we have all seen that you can buy a lot of point solutions, but in the modern way, to be an agile business, you got to have it all flow together, and you can't just piecemeal things together and hope they work. We have seen that in the ERP market with the successful transition from siloed accounting, finance applications to an enterprise platform. And so that's our vision to the market, is that ultimately, it'll be about information governance that includes access governance as a key component. So we provide application governance, we provide process governance, we provide the platform where you can put your risk control audit information so that it's all fully integrated and visible to senior management through the advanced analytics capabilities, where predictive analytics can help you prevent these risks from happening in the future. So a lot to cover. Today's focus, I'll stay on that, which is fine-grained identity governance. So if you look at how we break that fine-grained identity governance, it basically breaks down into pretty closely to what I mentioned in the description of identity governance in the previous segment. But basically, it has the policy, the ability to test those policies, SAML API, which enables us to do integration with IDMs if you have some, roles manager, which are basically that entitlement management component of the IDM requirements, user provisioning, role-based, workflow-based, firefighter for privileged users, and then monitoring and certification. So you can see we check all the boxes of what the market leaders and research organizations that do independent IT research have indicated what a good identity governance system has. What makes us unique, and the extra step or the extra mile that we go for you, is the ability to fine-grain it, which means that we contextualize that down to the element of data and the element of the security at the very lowest level. And that combination makes us fine-grained and unique uniquely positioned to protect your data and your privileges that the traditional, first or second generation folks that came to the market of just automation have not paid attention as much to that problem. But that's what the market is needing, and that's where customers are coming in and saying that we need that, that level of assurance down at the very transaction level and not just at the role level, because role I can rename a role from procurement to finance, and underneath it could still give you all the access to procurement and bank accounts, right? So we all know that that's a game that not only the externals can play, that the threats from outside can happen, but also, and realistically, when you implement a new system, those kind of things we have seen from experience. So if you do have an IDM system, we do provide API services. So SafePass access controls can work in conjunction with your ticketing system, if that's what you're using for manual IDM, or if you're using a sophisticated IDM system, you've already invested in that, you don't need to throw that away. We can leverage that and basically talk to it through these various IDM services that iAccess offers, which is one of the products that we'll talk about in our case study. So now let's talk about the last few minutes we have. Let's talk about that case study and see how our customers are using identity governance that SafePass has put together to get that fine-grained level of security, right? So one of our clients is in the, it's a government agency. So I picked this because their threshold for risk is very, very low as compared to any business, right? They're the organization in the US that's been mandated to ensure the safety and security as well as the reliability of our nuclear arsenal, the deterrent arsenal we have to protect the nation, right? So it's as big a mission, I believe, that an organization can have, which is really the protection of us as a nation. And so their focus is to just basically look at global threats, whether it's from terrorism, from weapons of mass destruction, and really respond to that in a way that is consistent with our values and strategy and the science behind it, right? So when they were looking at improving their identity governance, they of course had the systems in place. So I'm not saying that we just showed up and showed them how to do this. They already have very sophisticated methods of giving users access, and they were looking for the best possible solution, and they had the option to go to anyone in the world, and certainly any technology company in the US to buy the best for the protection of our nation. And so they chose SafePass to replace a number of their legacy ID governance systems. I think you all saw my example earlier about the fragmented approach to identity governance, and unfortunately that's what they had. I mean, so they were completely doing what they need to, but it was just taking them a tremendous amount of time to accomplish this. And so maintaining access, consistent access across their ERP system, subsidiaries, etc., that had shared services, etc. And then of course they have lots of auditors, as you might imagine. And the auditors were looking at, being able to rely on this data and be able to perform certification through access controls monitoring. So they chose us and our product, SafePaaS, which is the platform that I had mentioned, and I'll share a little bit examples. Of course, this is just demo information. I can't share their information, but at the end of the day, the results were fantastic for them. They were able to not only improve their controls, but also reduce the cost on the taxpayer. So one of their objectives and mission is to improve efficiencies and save taxpayer where they can. So we were able to help them, give them a $50,000 per year saving, and I think it's grown since then as their user base has grown, and also their remediation cost has been reduced, and the manual steps that they were implementing to be able to manage this very cumbersome access governance process for a high-risk organization, they're able to mitigate that risk. They used SafePass to create certain policies to compliance with the provisioning process, which goes beyond just segregation of duties. They're not a Wall Street listed public company where you just check the box with SOD and say, I'm done. They really care about protecting the information from getting in the wrong hands. So the likelihood and the impact analysis that they did on access risk was significantly held to a higher standard than I've seen at just a normal run-of-the-mill public company. So they also were able to, by putting the rules and remediation process in with SafePass, they're able to reduce their cost of ownership overall and improve their controls and policies by implementing the ability to review, update, prepare, review, and update changes to their roles and role design, which is a root cause of many of these entitlement creeps that we talked about earlier. And they were able to accelerate their approval process. So, the faster you can get access to the correct information you need, the faster you can be productive in doing your mission, which is to protect our nation against the threats. So that's a fantastic success story from my perspective. Really proud to have them as a customer. 3 years into it, they continue to give us some really good feedback, and we continue to improve our products as they learn and the new science comes to the market. So that's a success story. How do they do that? I'll just use some examples. So they have the ability to dashboard their identity governance, and that's if you go back to that fragmentation slide where you have 5 different systems for provisioning, and nobody can see what's happening. Proof is in the pudding. So when you go to SafePass, you can get a single dashboard with all your critical key performance indicators, let's say around your identity governance in one page, and you can add and change, and then you can drill down into it. So if I want to see a certain user or certain role or certain privileges, I can see how many open issues I have and what I got to do to resolve this. This is obviously not any customer's data. This is from our vision system, which shows about 250,000 SOD violations, which is basically a mock-up. So obviously we would like that to be close to 0. So the rules engine basically enables you to define those policies, right, that these results are based on. So how do we get to that dashboard on the previous slide? It's based on the analysis that's done by selecting the rules. Now, rules, you can build your own, or you can use the rules that we have built for hundreds of customers in the past 15 years, including the ones that have been tested by major audit firms, including the Big Four. So all of that information is embedded into the rule, but we also realize these kinds of, type access governance type exercises can lead to false positives too. So whether it's a personalization of a system or customization or some other ways you've already implemented controls, embedded those into your ERP or other business critical applications, you can mark them up as exceptions or corrective actions if they're a work in progress. So you're not burdened by the false positives component, right? That's where you have to be very careful in selecting the modern identity governance platform, because you've got to be able to prevent that, and then having a good audit trail, so people can't get in and just willy-nilly change your policies, and which is where a lot of the risk happens, right? So have a good history of all the rules and what has been added, what exceptions have been made, and so forth. So once these rules are set up and you're ready to go, you've deployed the solution, integrated that with your either IDM system or your ticketing system or both, or whatever the scenario is. Now you're ready to turn it over to the users, where the users can simply come in and request access, right? And that access limits their ability to even ask for access by a couple of things. One is the access groups. So the concept of access groups is that, I only want my finance folks in Dallas, for example, to see what they can possibly access in Dallas. I don't want them to even see the access in UK, right, or Germany. I don't want them to be able to just even try to access that, because that's really outside of their organization, right? Their organization is here in Dallas. So I shouldn't be able to ask for access to a supplier, a bank account in Germany, in Frankfurt, if I'm based here in Dallas, right? So that's the access group, the concept that, again, a more modern concept than most of the traditional IDMs, because they basically let you access whatever you want. And then enablement of this firefighter. So we talked a lot about privilege access. So if I'm a user that wants privileges that are beyond the the basic, what we call birthrights in this industry, and to be able to do my timesheets and my expenses might be my birthright as an employee of the organization. But to be able to create a supplier and pay that supplier is a privilege that is granted to a limited number of folks in the organization. And then even a higher elevated privilege would be this keys to the kingdom, which is I can go and, basically go anywhere in the application. Well, if you want that higher level of privilege, and you guys as customers can decide what that is, you want to be able to enable the firefighter option. The firefighter then starts to monitor what they're accessing once they log in. And that, again, helps you protect against someone either through a cyber security attack or through various means, just an insider threat, gets into a high level of privilege, and that privilege can be then ghosted by someone that you don't recognize and can perform damaging transaction. So by having that monitoring around elevated privilege, you can prevent cybersecurity risks that are otherwise exposed, even with a good basic identity governance system. You don't have that granular level of protection against the data, and that's where we're seeing the cyber criminals take advantage of the organization business critical application. So what that does for me is that if people are coming in with high privileges and they're trying to change a bank account of a supplier, I can catch that, right? Where did they come in? Who were they logged in as? What did they change and when did they change? And I can workflow that over to my head of procurement or head of security or a combination thereof, up to whoever you want to include in that chain of events to alert the organization, right? So this will prevent, for example, someone outsider coming into your network through that email connection, which is now giving them access to change the bank accounts. We have now monitoring capability added to your IT governance process, which the traditional identity governance products and tools and solutions don't offer. So you're missing out that. In my mind, if you don't look at your data and you just look at the ID, you've only solved half the problem, right? And half the problem in the risk business means you haven't solved it. It's all about completeness. So you really need to think about protecting your data when it comes to protecting your identity. And that's the message I want to leave you with today with this lessons learned from this case study. So having said that, how do you protect data? So what we have done at SafePaaS is created basically an object library of all the high-risk objects. And of course, we don't know every high-risk object in your organization. So there may be others that you can add, but we do have a pretty good idea because we've been doing it for a long time with lots of customers. So we have a catalog of hundreds of objects that we think are high risk based on what risk events we have seen, our auditors and their external auditors have notified. And so you do have a starting point, a jump start, if you will, with hundreds of things that you can deploy and protect right away to make sure that even if someone gets in your system through that cyber process, like get to access to a bank account, as soon as they try to conduct a transaction, you will be notified, alerts will go throughout the enterprise, and you'll be able to catch that and protect that. And that's a big part of what CrowdStrike is trying to attempt to do and educate the market, that by the time they're called in, you've already been attacked, and so you're in full remediation mode. And by having this kind of a technology, CrowdStrike can now really improve that remediation timeline by partnering with SafePaaS as an example, right? If their customers have SafePaaS, they can get there faster. And then, of course, everything is workflow. So I mentioned, alerts will go off. So it's not just one-way alert, it's a complete workflow. So let's say we send the head of procurement an email workflow saying that, hey, someone had just changed a bank account. You must care that this happened 3 times in the last 30 minutes. And let's say they just don't see it because they're on a plane somewhere. You can have multiple escalation levels. You can also have an audit trail that your auditors can see on their dashboard. Your CISO can see it. So you can really build out this, and then you can capture the response. So if they are responding to it, you can also de-escalate things. So we identified the threat, we de-escalated that, we were able to remove that user from the system or whatever the remediation was that your IT security group did. You can all put that remediation effort in, so not the whole enterprise is now in a panic mode, right? You can de-escalate things as actions are taken. And we capture all that, by the way, so when your CFO or CEO is asked during the board meeting or stockholder meeting, well, what attacks occurred? What have you done about it? Who do you inform? You have it all logged here in this SafePaaS workflow-enabled application. So you're on top of the world. Your reputation is preserved. We all know that you're gonna, companies are gonna get attacked. But the question is, what are you doing when somebody gets in your network to protect your data and not just your identity? Because knowing identity is just half the battle, right? So with that, Emma, I think we finished a few minutes early. Hopefully there's some room for questions. Do we have any questions today?
Yes, we have had a couple of questions come in. The first one being, can SafePaaS protect our sensitive data?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? Because sensitive data is, again, it's a definition, the eye of the beholder a little bit. But the definition to me would be, I mentioned bank account through this presentation, so obviously that's an example. It could be, sensitive data from a GDPR perspective. It may be your customer information. It may be national IDs for your employees. All of that is, if you're doing CCPA, which is just went live here in the US beginning of the year. So that's all sensitive data. Just depends what your objectives are. So at SafePaaS, what we're doing is helping you protect against that data. We have a tool called Data Probe that scans that data, and you have the ability to add a data governor. And that data governor will enable you to restrict that sensitive data, who can see it on our platform. And if that data is being requested through a user provisioning process, we can put a policy around it. So if somebody's asking for access to bank accounts, you could put a policy around that, say that that would go through an approval process, and even when they have access, you can mask or scramble that data. So yeah, there's many different ways to protect that data. Just depends on the context. You have to contextualize sensitive data so the right people have it and the wrong people are prevented.
Okay, great.
Anything else?
And yes, how does SafePaaS work with our current provisioning system we have in place?
Yeah, so as I said, there was a slide in there. I would ask you to go take a look at that. We have API capabilities, and we're always adding and growing that. So it just depends what IDM system you have or what provisioning process you have today. What we are seeing a lot in the market are the newer IDM players like Okta, Azure, IBM has something, Hitachi, and some of these guys, and SailPoint, of course, and OneLogin. We have a partnership with them, I think. So we have quite a few IDM players we already have out of the box capabilities, but the API is there for you to build your own integration if you want. And then on the help desk side, we're seeing ServiceNow and others in the help desk world. So yeah, we absolutely understand that it's important for us to fit into your current environment, and we don't force customers to replace that until that becomes something that they need to do on their own. So yeah, absolutely, we provide lots of ways to integrate, and part of the professional services team that I lead at SafePaaS, our job is to really understand that and make sure we provide you a solution that you can justify to the business. So thank you everybody for joining. Emma, if you want to close this out.
Thanks, Adele. Yes, thank you to everybody for joining us today. You will receive the recording in a follow-up email. And if you do have any further questions, then please reach out to me and we're more than happy to answer them. And we hope you'll be able to join us again on March the 15th when we'll be joined by our partners, Searchlight, and we'll be discussing digital transformation. So we hope to see you all then. So thank you and bye-bye.